So we made all three of you see Batman versus Superman.
Yeah. That happened.
I got food poisoning. That's why I can say it. I promise.
A likely story.
It's the biggest movie in the world right now. Stephen, I'll start with you. Why is Batman fighting Superman?
I saw the movie. I'm not quite sure. There was all this grand philosophical blather about law and the city and Gotham. I think there were sort of two things. Like what happened with Batman is Batman went pure Dick Cheney. Like he's gone full driving around the city with a hazmat suit in the back of the limousine. He's killing people, which is not really something Batman does. He's torturing people, branding them, and he's afraid of Superman, who's an alien. Superman as an alien is closer to Obama with drones, I guess. So he's like, his spirit is good, but he's still killing people, right? And then they get into conflict, but then it gets resolved in the most banal possible way, and then they fight a big alien at the end, and that's
I'm
really
picturing that explanation to a little kid about the philosophical blather and the Dick Cheney metaphor.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess they're fighting because they need a movie. Like that's what you should tell your kids.
Rachel, why is this movie number one right now?
I mean, it's the DC Comics kind of juggernaut. It's it's big, it's blaring, it's blasting. I didn't find it a pleasurable movie to watch. I mean, it's not. My objections to the movie weren't because it wasn't a serious movie. It's just the action was very sort of muddy and hard to see. But I think this is Superman versus Batman. This is huge.
How could that not be number one?
And I think it's also, after Man of Steel, which was the setup to this, which was the beginnings of Superman, this kind of, darker, broody Superman. This is about to launch a whole bunch of new DC movies. So Wonder Woman shows up in this. We get introduced to Flash. We get introduced to Aquaman and to Cyborg. So this is kind of the appetizer to all the movies we're going to be seeing over the next decade that are coming out of the DC universe.
Now, critics are saying this movie is way too dark. Clearly, the fandom doesn't mind. But Emily, what is the appeal of a super dark superhero movie?
I think that what was happening is Zack Snyder was trying to make, The Dark Knight Rises. He was trying to make the politically allegorical. We recognize the dark times. This is a superhero. We don't deserve him, but we need him right now. Unfortunately, it kind of fell on its face. It wasn't dark enough, and it wasn't goofy enough. And I laughed throughout the movie, but then when I left, I was like, I don't remember any fun parts at all. I couldn't call back even wooden dialogue. The explosions were overdone and very CGI. It's just a mess. It's a messy movie that has no narrative drive and is very clearly made. The darkest thing about it is that people are watching it and forking over their money just because of marketing.
Yeah. I mean, I just couldn't figure it out. I mean, and unpacking the allegories from movies, it's kind of what I do. I'm pretty good at it. And I mean, I have a PhD in Shakespeare, and I know how to analyze things. And it's just okay, that guy's who? That guy's the Republican? Okay, so he's Google,
right.
But Google's bad now?
Right.
Google's the bad? Or no, wait a minute, is that Trump?
But
or
I
is
think
that, you could never figure it out?
And this is sort of, this is to Emily's point, this is sort of where this is where comic books have always been to a degree, but there was often a fun side. But I think this is where, I think that there is this sense of, in order to make a comic book movie, you have to make it weighty, and you have to sort of laden it down with these important, notes about security versus freedom, or about, this movie had a lot to do with God and the Superman, not just the character, but the idea of this sort of Ubermensch. But it sucked all the fun. And it actually, part of the problem for me too is that Henry Cavill and Ben Affleck are they're non-entities when it comes to charisma. So,
you hate them, but the world disagrees with them. Some people don't mind Ben Affleck.
I feel like you feel Ben Affleck's regret on his face throughout the entire. You think he just is I signed up for this. I made such a bad choice. He is reflecting on all the bad choices he has made, and so I also think that there isn't. I feel like Jesse Eisenberg playing Lex Luthor, does his best kind of nerdy, geeky sort of. I mean, there's an amazing supporting cast. So Diane Lane is in this, Kevin Costner is in this, Holly Hunter. I mean, there are tremendous people on the sidelines who are doing great work. But I think the problem is there's a black hole at the center of these two guys who don't bring these superheroes to life in any kind of way that's interesting.
Well, I want to get more deep into this question of whether a superhero movie is a worthwhile way to explore contemporary politics. But first, here's what the director, Zack Snyder, had to say about Batman killing in the movie in terms of the darkness.
I tried to do it like by proxy. You'd shoot the car that they're in, the car would blow up, or the grenade would go off in the guy's hand or whatever. Or you'd shoot the tank of the thing, and the guy pretty much lights his own tank with the thing. So I perceive it as not him killing directly, but by sort of, if the bad guys are associated with the thing that happens to blow up, that's not really. He would say that that's not really my problem. Like they shouldn't have been around that sort of machine gun. What's that?
It's like manslaughter.
Yeah, a little more like manslaughter than actual murder.
Yeah.
So, Stephen, you brought up Batman murdering people
Yes.
in this movie. What do you make of Zack Snyder's argument there?
Well, did you hear how incoherent he sounded there? That was like the worst possible explanation. So, like, I want it to be violent, but I want it to be a grenade blowing up in somebody's hand, which isn't violence. I mean, it doesn't. Then that was what the movie lacked to me, just basic coherence.
Well, and I think also the movie kind of wants to make this point. So it opens with the final sort of part of Man of Steel, where you see the destruction from the human side. So you have these superheroes fighting in space, and they're knocking out buildings, and thousands of people die, and you see it from a human level. The film seems to go in saying these superheroes have too much power. They are too frightening. We need to think about the scale of the human cost here. But then this film ends with massive destruction, like this kind of orgasmic kind of blowing up of everything. So it wants to sort of have its cake and eat it too. It wants to sort of indict the violence, but then also revel in the violence.
Okay, Emily, let me get your thoughts on that. Is there any coherent political comment going on in this film?
My thoughts are no. No, there is not. Although Jesse Eisenberg does a wonderful, very highly overcommitted turn as someone who has read some Nietzsche one time.
Yeah, exactly.
And he seems to try to be the vehicle for the exposition of the weighty themes. But at the same time, as Rachel pointed out, it's like a 9/11 movie, except for we're worshiping the terrorists, but it's not like a comment on that. And then there's this horrifying like media bonanza where in the newspaper that Clark Kent works at and also real live broadcasters, they're all talking about how the implications of these like super people and what does it mean? And it's all questions and zero answers, and it doesn't reflect any element of our real lives.
I chatted with Marilyn Robinson last week, Pulitzer Prize-winning author, and one thing she said really struck me. She said, somehow in our culture we've developed this notion that good people aren't interesting. And I wonder if maybe there's so much darkness in here that it possibly undercuts the possibility of any commentary, any kind of rich commentary. What do you think, Stephen?
Well, I mean, that's a very interesting point, although I would say that I tend to like dark characters, and I tend to, especially with superheroes, where having an all-powerful guy who just does good is not really that interesting. But, it's the thing, like, you can be dark, and then you can also be incoherent. And also, of course, we're dealing with a world of superhero cliches that have been so exposed that we're all trying to deal with them. So this movie is the exact opposite of Deadpool, right? Because Deadpool is like, here are all the superhero cliches. It's a very dark movie, but it's very funny. And this one, it's just like, let's just repeat all the cliches in no particular order and see if any of them stick.
It's interesting.
Right?
It's interesting because I watch Supergirl on TV, and it's like it is the polar opposite of Superman versus Batman, in that it is low budget. It's kind of corny and cheesy, but it actually, as part of the DC world, it actually raises more interesting questions about how to be good and the responsibility of power in a kind of corny TV show than this huge monster mega budget movie does.
They're so afraid to be corny. That's really the problem. And they should just understand, like, we're talking about kryptonite here. It is corny.
I don't know. I thought the movie was pretty corny.
Yeah,
Just not self-aware or taking no delight in that fact.
Yeah.